Robb Stark sat quietly in his war tent while the cold wind moved through the camp outside. The northern banners fluttered in the dark, and soldiers whispered near their fires. Everyone believed the wall was slowly turning against the north. Word had spread that Lord Roose Bolton had begun acting strangely too quiet, too careful, and too distant from the Stark course. But what no one knew was that Robb and his mother, Catelyn Stark, had begun to suspect something terrible. Catelyn stood beside the table, looking down at the map of the Riverlands. Her finger slowly traced the roads near Harrenhal. "Roose Bolton is a patient man," she said softly. "Too patient. Men like him do not simply follow kings. They wait until the moment is right." Robb looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. "You think he plans to betray us?" "I don't think," Catelyn replied quietly. "I feel it. And a mother learns to trust such feelings." For days, Robb had noticed small signs. Bolton's letters were short and vague. His movements were slow when Robb asked for speed, yet fast when it suited him. Even the men Bolton sent carried strange rumors. So Robb made a dangerous decision. "If Roose Bolton plans to betray the North," Robb said, "then we must let him believe he already has." Catelyn looked at him carefully. "A trap." Robb nodded. The plan was simple but risky. Robb would send a message asking Roose Bolton to meet him secretly. With only a small guard, the message would claim Robb needed Bolton's advice for a surprise attack against the Lannisters. But the truth was very different. Hidden soldiers would surround the meeting place. The moment Bolton revealed his true intentions or showed the slightest sign of treachery, he would be captured. Catelyn was not fully comfortable with it. "Roose Bolton is not a man to underestimate," she warned. "He survived many wars before you were born." Robb gave a small smile. "Then let him survive one more, if he proves loyal." The message was sent. 3 days later, news arrived that Roose Bolton was riding to meet the king in the north. The meeting place was chosen carefully, an abandoned stone watchtower in the woods near the Trident. It looked empty and forgotten. But in truth, hundreds of northern soldiers were hidden in the surrounding trees. Great Jon Umber commanded one side of the forest. Mormont commanded the other. Even Robb's direwolf, Greywind, waited silently in the shadows. Night came. Torches burned around the watchtower as Robb and Catelyn waited inside with only a few visible guards. Catelyn's heart beat faster than usual. She had lived through enough politics to know how dangerous this moment was. Then the sound of horses echoed through the trees. Roose Bolton had arrived. He rode slowly toward the tower with only 10 riders behind him. His pale eyes looked calm, almost bored. The banners of House Bolton moved gently in the wind. Those terrible flayed men on pink cloth. Bolton dismounted smoothly. "Your Grace," he said politely as he entered the tower. "You wish to see me?" Robb studied him carefully. Roose Bolton's voice was always quiet, always controlled. "Yes," Robb replied. "I needed to speak with you privately." Bolton's pale eyes moved briefly toward Catelyn. "My lady." Catelyn nodded slightly, but said nothing. Robb walked toward the map table. "I am planning a major attack on the Lannister forces near the Twins," Robb said. "But I need someone I trust to lead the first movement." Roose Bolton stepped closer. "And you believe that man is me?" Robb watched his face carefully. "You have always been careful," Robb said. "Careful men survive wars." Bolton gave a faint smile. "Careful men also choose the winning side, Your Grace." For a brief moment, the tower became completely silent. Catelyn felt the air grow colder. Robb slowly raised his head. "What do you mean by that, Lord Bolton?" Bolton's pale eyes showed no fear. "Only that wars are unpredictable," he said calmly. "And kings who lose too many battles often find their friends disappearing." Outside the tower, the hidden soldiers quietly tightened their grip on their weapons. The trap was closing. Robb's voice grew colder. "So tell me honestly, Lord Bolton, if the North were to fall, where would your loyalty go?" Roose Bolton looked at him for a long moment. Then he gave a thin, almost ghost-like smile. "Where loyalty always goes, your grace," he said softly. "To the side that survives." At that exact moment, Grey Wind began to growl in the darkness outside, and Robb Stark finally understood. The trap had worked, but the night was far from over. Bolton's riders outside were already moving. Steel began to ring in the forest, and inside the tower, Robb Stark reached for his sword. The game of betrayal had begun. The moment Roose Bolton finished his sentence, the quiet inside the tower broke like glass. Grey Wind's deep growl outside turned into a loud, angry roar. In the forest, hidden northern soldiers suddenly moved. Steel scraped against steel and horses screamed in panic. Inside the watchtower, Robb Stark's hand quickly moved to the hilt of his sword. Roose Bolton did not panic. In fact, he looked almost amused. "You came prepared," Bolton said calmly. Robb's sword slowly slid out of its sheath. The sound echoed through the tower. "So did you," Robb replied coldly. Bolton's pale eyes flickered slightly toward the door, where the noise of fighting had begun, but his face remained calm, almost emotionless. Catelyn Stark stepped closer to Robb. Her heart was beating fast, but she kept her voice steady. "You knew this was a trap," she said. Bolton looked at her with the same cold politeness. "My lady, I suspected," he replied, "but I was curious to see how clever the young wolf had become." Outside, the sounds of battle were growing louder. Northern soldiers shouted commands while Bolton's riders fought desperately to break through the hidden lines. Robb kept his sword pointed at Bolton. "You brought only 10 men," Robb said. "Did you really think they could save you?" Bolton folded his hands behind his back like a man calmly discussing the weather. "No," he answered quietly. "I brought 10 men to confirm something." Robb's eyes narrowed. "And what was that?" Bolton's thin smile returned. "That you already suspect me." For a moment, silence filled the tower again. Then suddenly one of the guards outside the door shouted, "Your Grace, some of Bolton's men are trying to escape into the trees." The clash of swords grew even louder. Robb did not look away from Bolton. "Your riders are dying outside," Robb said. "You walked straight into our trap." Bolton slowly walked closer to the table with the war map. "Perhaps," he said calmly, "but traps can be unpredictable things." Catelyn noticed something strange. Bolton was too calm, far too calm. Her eyes suddenly widened. "Robb," she whispered, but before she could finish, a loud horn blast echoed through the forest. One horn, then another, then a third. Robb turned sharply toward the door. Those horns were not northern signals. Outside, new shouts suddenly filled the woods. "Bolton banners! Bolton riders!" Catelyn's face turned pale. "That's impossible," Robb said. But it was not impossible. From the dark forest beyond the hidden northern lines, dozens of mounted soldiers suddenly appeared. Their banners showed the flayed man of House Bolton. They crashed into the northern soldiers like a storm. The trap had been reversed. Inside the tower, Roose Bolton watched Robb carefully. "You see, Your Grace," Bolton said softly, "I suspected you might try something clever." Robb's jaw tightened. "So you prepared your own trap?" Bolton nodded slightly. "A small precaution." Outside, the battle was now fully raging. Northern soldiers were strong fighters, but the sudden attack from Bolton reinforcements had thrown the lines into chaos. Raywind's furious howls echoed through the trees as he attacked Bolton riders. Inside the tower, the tension became deadly. Robb pointed his sword directly at Bolton's chest. "Call them off," Robb ordered. Bolton did not move. "I'm afraid that would be difficult." "Why?" Bolton tilted his head slightly. "Because they're not here to rescue me." Catelyn's stomach tightened. "Then why are they here?" Bolton's pale eyes turned toward Robb again. "They are here," he said quietly, "to see which king walks out of this tower alive." The meaning was clear. If Robb died tonight, the North would fall into chaos. Bolton's forces could claim they tried to defend their king, but arrived too late. Or perhaps they would simply choose a new king. Robb Stark understood the game instantly. "You planned this carefully," Robb said. Bolton's thin smile grew slightly. "I have always admired careful planning." Suddenly the tower door burst open. Great Jon Umber stormed inside, blood on his armor. "Your Grace," he roared. "More Bolton riders coming from the east. Looks like 50 more at least." Robb's mind raced. The trap had worked, but Bolton had expected it. Now the entire forest had become a battlefield. Grey Wind suddenly leapt through the doorway, fur covered with blood, but eyes burning with fury. He stood beside Robb, growling loudly at Bolton. For the first time, Bolton took a small step backward. Direwolves were not something even Roose Bolton enjoyed facing. Robb slowly raised his sword again. "Looks like your careful plan may still fail," Robb said. Bolton's calm expression returned. "War is full of surprises," he replied. Outside, the battle grew louder than ever. Torches lit the forest like a burning sea of fire, and in the middle of it all stood the young king in the north, facing the most dangerous traitor in his army. But Robb Stark was not done yet, and Roose Bolton had just made the biggest mistake of the night, because the one thing Bolton had not planned for was what Robb Stark had hidden deeper in the forest. Something even more dangerous than soldiers, something Bolton would never expect. And within minutes, the entire battle would change. For a few seconds inside the tower, no one moved. Outside, the battle in the forest had become wild and chaotic. Torches moved through the darkness like angry fireflies. Steel clashed, men shouted, and horses screamed as the fighting grew worse. Robb Stark stood still, his sword ready, Grey Wind beside him with teeth bared. Roose Bolton watched them both carefully. His face remained pale and calm, but now there was a small tension in his eyes. Great Jon Umber wiped blood from his beard and looked at Robb. "Your Grace," he growled, "say the word and I'll cut this snake in half." Bolton did not react. He simply looked at Robb as if waiting for a decision. But Robb suddenly did something unexpected. He lowered his sword. Greychorn looked shocked. Even Catelyn turned quickly toward her son. "Robb," she whispered. Robb's face was serious, but there was confidence in his eyes. "Lord Bolton," Robb said quietly, "you're right about one thing." Bolton raised an eyebrow slightly. "Oh, war is full of surprises. For the first time." Robb gave a small smile. Then he turned toward the open door and shouted one word. "Now!" For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then the ground itself seemed to shake. From the deeper forest behind the Bolton riders came a terrifying sound. Heavy footsteps, dozens of them. Bolton's eyes slowly turned toward the darkness outside. Then a soldier outside screamed, "Giants! Giants!" A massive roar echoed through the forest. Suddenly, huge shapes burst from the trees like moving mountains. Wildling giants. 3 enormous giants charged into the battlefield, each carrying huge tree trunks like clubs. Behind them came hundreds of wildling fighters led by a tall, red-bearded man, Tormund Giantsbane. The Bolton riders had been expecting only northern soldiers. They were not ready for giants. The first giant swung his tree trunk like a hammer and smashed 2 Bolton riders off their horses instantly. Another giant grabbed a soldier and threw him across the battlefield like a toy. The Bolton lines broke immediately. Inside the tower, Great Jon Umber burst into loud laughter. "By the old gods!" he shouted. "That's what you were hiding!" Catelyn stared at Robb in shock. "He brought wildlings." Robb nodded. "I made an agreement with them weeks ago," he said quietly. Bolton's calm mask finally cracked slightly. "You trust wildlings," he said coldly. Robb looked directly at him. "I trust enemies who speak honestly more than friends who whisper betrayal." Outside, the battle turned quickly. The giants smashed through Bolton's riders, while Tormund and his wildlings attacked from behind. Northern soldiers, seeing the sudden advantage, pushed forward again. Bolton's carefully planned rescue force was collapsing. Inside the tower, Bolton slowly stepped backward toward the door. Grey Wind growled louder. Robb noticed the movement immediately. "You're not leaving," Robb said. Bolton's pale eyes looked at him again. "That remains to be seen." Suddenly, one of Bolton's remaining guards inside the tower pulled a dagger and rushed toward Robb. But Grey Wind was faster. The direwolf leapt forward like a grey shadow. The man screamed for less than a second before Grey Wind slammed him to the ground. The tower floor became stained with blood. Great Jon grabbed another Bolton guard and smashed him against the wall. Within seconds, Bolton's last men inside the tower were dead. Only Roose Bolton remained. He looked around slowly. Outside, the sound of Bolton soldiers dying filled the forest. Inside, Robb Stark, Great Jon Umber, Grey Wind, and several northern guards surrounded him. Still, Roose Bolton did not look afraid. Instead, he gave a thin smile. "Well played, Your Grace." Robb stepped closer. "You betrayed the North." Bolton shrugged slightly. "I prepared for possibilities. You planned to kill me." Bolton said nothing. That silence was enough. Catelyn stepped forward. "You murdered loyal men for power," she said angrily. "And you would have murdered the king in the North." Bolton looked at her calmly. "Power has always required unpleasant decisions." Great Jon cracked his knuckles. "Say the word, Robb." Robb raised a hand. "No." Mode raised a hand. "No." Everyone looked at him. Robb stared directly into Bolton's pale eyes. "You're going to answer for your crimes," Robb said. Bolton tilted his head. "Am I?" Then suddenly, far away in the forest, another horn blew. A long, deep horn. Not a Bolton horn. Not a northern horn. Everyone inside the tower froze. Even the giants outside seemed to pause. The sound came again. A deep, ancient horn echoing through the night. Tormund's voice suddenly shouted from the battlefield. "White walkers!" Catelyn's blood turned cold. Bolton's expression changed for the first time. Even Robb felt his heart drop. From the far edge of the forest, a strange blue glow slowly appeared between the trees. The war between Stark and Bolton had suddenly become something much worse, because something ancient had just entered the battlefield, and it did not care who won the war. For a moment, the entire battlefield froze. Northern soldiers, Wildlings, and Bolton riders all turned toward the dark forest where the strange blue glow was growing brighter. The wind itself felt colder, like winter had suddenly arrived in the middle of the night. Inside the tower, no one spoke. Catelyn Stark felt a chill run through her body. "White walkers," she whispered. Robb stepped toward the door, staring into the forest. At first he saw nothing but darkness between the trees. Then the blue light appeared again, slowly moving. Closer. Outside, Tormund Giantsbane shouted loudly to the Wildlings, "Form up! Get your W fence!" Reedy. The giants also stopped their attack. Even those massive creatures seemed uneasy now. One of them gave a deep, nervous grunt while looking toward the glowing forest. Great Jon Umber frowned. "What kind of trick is this?" he muttered. But Roose Bolton quietly answered, "No trick." Everyone looked at him. Bolton's pale eyes were focused on the blue glow. "They are real," he said softly. Robb turned sharply toward him. "You've seen them before?" Bolton slowly nodded. "Only once, many years ago, beyond the wall." Catelyn stared at him with disbelief. "And you never told anyone?" Bolton gave a cold shrug. Most men would call such stories madness. Outside, the forest suddenly became silent. Too silent. No wind. No winds. No insects. No sound at all. Then a horse screamed. A Bolton rider near the edge of the trees suddenly fell from his horse. The animal ran wildly away into the darkness. Something had pulled the rider off. The soldiers watching could not see what it was. Then the body slowly stood up again, but it was wrong. The man's eyes were glowing bright blue. The dead soldier had risen. The first white. 7 hells. Great Jon whispered. The dead rider began walking slowly toward the battlefield. Then another body stood up, and another, and another. All across the forest floor, dead soldiers from both sides began rising again. The battle between Stark and Bolton had created many corpses. Now those corpses were standing again, and they were not alone. From the dark trees, tall, thin figures slowly stepped forward. Their armor looked like frozen ice. Their pale skin almost glowed under the blue light. White Walkers. There were 5 of them. The temperature dropped so suddenly that the soldiers could see their breath in the air. Tormund shouted again, "Fire! Get! Fire!" Wildlings quickly grabbed torches and flaming arrows. Inside the tower, Robb understood the danger instantly. "Great Jon," he ordered, "tell the men to stop fighting Bolton's soldiers." Great Jon looked confused. But now, Great Jon ran outside, roaring commands to the northern soldiers. "Stop fighting. Kill the dead Ones." Outside, the battlefield quickly changed. Northern soldiers, wildlings, and even the surviving Bolton riders turned to face the real enemy, the dead. The first group of whites rushed forward with unnatural speed. One giant swung his huge club and smashed several whites into pieces. But the broken pieces kept moving, crawling across the ground. "Burn them!" Tormund shouted. Flaming arrows filled the air. When the arrows struck the whites, their bodies caught fire and stopped moving. But more dead bodies kept rising. Inside the tower, Robb grabbed Bolton's collar. "If this is another one of your plans..." Bolton interrupted him calmly. "This is not my doing, Your Grace." His voice was quiet, but serious. "Tonight we all share the same enemy." Robb stared into his pale eyes for a moment. For once, Bolton seemed honest. Outside the tower, a grey wind suddenly ran forward into the battlefield, tearing into a group of whites. The dire wolf moved like lightning, ripping apart dead soldiers before they could reach the living. Then something strange happened. One of the White Walkers slowly raised its icy spear. The whites suddenly stopped moving. The entire army of dead froze in place. The walker seemed to be watching the battlefield, studying the humans. Its glowing blue eyes slowly turned toward the tower, toward Robb Stark. Inside the tower, Catelyn felt fear like she had never known before. "It's looking at you," she whispered. Robb felt it too. The creature was not attacking. It was watching, almost like it was curious. Then the White Walker slowly raised its spear again and pointed directly at Robb. Bolton quietly spoke beside him. "I believe, Your Grace, it has chosen you." The army of the dead suddenly roared and charged forward again. Hundreds of whites rushed toward the tower at once. And now the real battle for survival had begun. Because this was no longer a war for the North. This was a war for the living. The moment the White Walker lowered its spear, the army of the dead rushed forward like a black wave. Hundreds of whites ran across the battlefield with unnatural speed. Their blue eyes glowed in the darkness, and their broken armor clattered as they moved. "To the tower!" Robb shouted. Northern soldiers and wildlings quickly formed a defensive line around the watchtower. Torches were thrown to the ground to create small walls of fire. Fire slowed the dead, but it did not stop them. A group of whites crashed into the line of soldiers. One northern man stabbed a corpse through the chest, but the dead man kept moving and grabbed him by the throat. Grey Wind leapt forward and tore the white apart before it could kill him. Nearby, one of the giants smashed several whites with his tree trunk. Bodies exploded into pieces, but even those pieces still twitched and crawled. "Burn them!" Tormund shouted again. Wildlings threw burning oil onto the ground, creating larger flames. The fire finally began destroying the dead bodies completely. Inside the tower, Robb watched the battlefield carefully. His mind was racing. "Great Jon," he called. The huge lord turned while fighting off a white. Aye, protect the fire lines. Do not let the dead break through. Greyjoy roared in agreement and charged back into the fight. Catelyn stood behind Robb, fear clear on her face. Catelyn stood behind Robb, fear clear on her face. "There are too many," she whispered. Robb knew she was right. Even with fire and giants, the dead kept coming. Then something strange happened. The White Walkers themselves began moving forward, slowly, gracefully, almost like kings walking through their army. One of them raised an icy sword. The moment it did, more bodies rose from the battlefield. Dead Bolton riders, dead northern soldiers, even dead horses. They stood up with glowing blue eyes. Roose Bolton watched this quietly from the tower wall. "This," he said softly, "is why the wall exists." Robb turned sharply toward him. "You knew they could do this." Bolton nodded slightly. "The dead are their army." Another loud crash shook the battlefield. One of the giants suddenly screamed in pain. A White Walker had thrown an icy spear straight through the giant's chest. The enormous creature fell to its knees with a thunderous impact. The Whites immediately climbed over its body. Tormund shouted in rage and charged toward them with a flaming axe. Robb's face tightened. If the giants fell, their lines would break. He grabbed a burning torch from the wall. "Stay here," he told Catelyn. "Robb." But he was already running. Grey Wind ran beside him as Robb jumped down from the tower and rushed into the battlefield. The air was freezing cold now. Every breath burned his lungs. A group of Whites attacked him immediately. Robb swung his sword in a wide arc, cutting one down while kicking another back into the fire. Grey Wind tore into two more. Robb moved quickly toward Tormund. The Wildling leader was surrounded by dead soldiers, but still fighting like a storm. "You're late, Stark," Tormund shouted. Robb threw his torch into a group of Whites, setting them ablaze. "We need to hold the line." Tormund nodded, but then both of them saw something terrifying. One of the White Walkers was walking directly toward them. Unlike the Whites, it moved calmly, confident. Its icy sword glowed faintly blue. Every step froze the ground beneath it. Robb felt something strange inside his chest. A deep, ancient fear. The creature stopped only a few steps away. For a moment, everything around them seemed quiet again. The White Walker studied Robb carefully. Its blue eyes were cold, but intelligent. Then it raised its sword. Robb lifted his own blade. Tormund shouted behind him, "Don't fight it alone!" Their swords collided with a loud crack. Robb almost dropped his weapon. The force of the strike was unbelievable. The Walker attacked again. Robb barely blocked it. Each strike felt like ice breaking against steel. Then something shocking happened. Robb's sword did not shatter. The White Walker suddenly paused. It looked at Robb's blade carefully. Recognition appeared in its glowing eyes. Robb realized why. His sword was made of Valyrian steel, one of the few weapons that could kill them. The Walker hissed softly, then it attacked again. This time, Robb moved faster. He stepped aside and slashed across the Walker's arm. The moment the Valyrian steel touched it, crack, the White Walker exploded into thousands of frozen shards. Every White nearby suddenly collapsed to the ground. For a second, the battlefield became silent again. Tormund stared in shock. "You killed it, but the victory lasted only a moment, because the other four White Walkers slowly stepped forward. And now they were angry, very angry." For a brief moment after the White Walker shattered, the battlefield went silent. All around Robb Stark, the Whites that had been attacking suddenly collapsed like lifeless puppets. Bodies dropped into the snow and mud, no longer moving. Tormund Giantsbane stared at the frozen shards on the ground. "By the gods," he muttered, "you really killed the bastard." But the silence did not last long. From the dark edge of the forest, the remaining four White Walkers stepped forward together. Their glowing blue eyes were now fixed directly on Robb, and this time they were not calm. The temperature dropped even more. Frost quickly spread across the ground like white veins. Then one of the White Walkers raised both arms slowly. The battlefield began to shake. Catelyn watched from the tower wall, her heart pounding in terror. "Oh no," she whispered. All across the battlefield, more bodies began to move. Not just the soldiers who had died tonight, older corpses, buried bones, even skeletons from forgotten graves near the forest. The earth itself seemed to be giving up its dead. Hundreds of new whites began rising. Tormund looked around in horror. "There's too many." Robb's jaw tightened. Even he had not expected this. Killing one walker had only made the others furious. One of the giants tried to smash through the rising whites, but the creatures climbed onto his legs and arms like insects. The giant roared in pain as dozens of dead bodies dragged him down. The northern soldiers were being surrounded. Inside the tower, Roose Bolton watched everything with careful interest. Great Jon Umber slammed the door behind him after cutting down 2 whites. "Your Grace is out there," he shouted. Catelyn grabbed his arm. "We must help him." Outside, Robb and Tormund were already fighting again. Whites rushed at them from every direction. Robb's Valyrian sword cuffed through them quickly, but there were simply too many. Grey Wind fought like a storm, ripping apart the dead with savage bites. But the real danger was still walking toward them. The 4 White Walkers. Slow, patient, deadly. One of them pointed its icy spear toward Robb again. It was clear now. They wanted him. Tormund noticed it too. "They're hunting you, Stark." Robb breathed heavily as he fought off another white. "I noticed." Another walker raised its weapon. Suddenly, a wave of freezing wind blasted across the battlefield. Several soldiers were thrown off their feet. Even Robb struggled to stand. The walkers were using their power now. Tormund grabbed Robb's shoulder. "You need to get back to the tower." Robb shook his head. "If they want me, I'll keep them away from the others." But before Tormund could argue, a loud roar echoed across the battlefield. Grey Wind had just jumped onto a White Walker. The direwolf moved like lightning, knocking the creature to the ground. But the walker reacted instantly. With unnatural speed, it grabbed Grey Wind by the throat and threw the massive wolf across the battlefield. Grey Wind slammed into the ground hard. "G Wind!" slammed into the ground hard. "G Wind!" Robb shouted. The direwolf struggled to stand, but was clearly hurt. The White Walker rose again and turned toward Robb. Now it was angry, very angry. It walked straight toward him. Robb lifted his sword again. Ramard lifted his sword again. Behind him, Tormund and several wildlings formed a small circle. "If we die tonight," Tormund said with a grim smile, "at least it'll be a good fight." But just then something unexpected happened. A loud horn blast echoed across the hills, then another, and another. Everyone turned toward the sound. From the northern road, hundreds of riders appeared with burning torches. Their banners showed the direwolf of House Stark. Reinforcements. More northern armies had arrived. At their front rode a tall, armored knight carrying a flaming sword. When the torchlight reached his face, Robb recognized him instantly. It was Jon Snow. Behind him rode dozens of Night's Watch brothers. Jon raised his sword and shouted loudly across the battlefield, "For the living!" The Night's Watch charged straight into the army of the dead with fire and dragon-glass weapons. The whites began burning and shattering under the new attack. For the first time that night, the army of the living was growing stronger. Robb stared in shock as Jon rode toward him. Jon pulled his horse to a stop beside him. "Took you long enough to start the real war," Jon said with a tired grin. Robb laughed breathlessly. "Good to see you too." But the moment did not last long, because the 4 remaining White Walkers were now watching Jon Snow as well. 2 Stark wolves, 2 threats, and the real battle had only just begun. The arrival of Jon Snow and the Night's Watch changed the battlefield instantly. Torches burned brighter, and the sound of fighting grew louder again. Night's Watch brothers rushed forward with dragon-glass daggers and flaming spears. cutting through the whites with skill and experience. Jon Snow rode through the chaos like a storm, his sword Longclaw flashing in the firelight. Every swing of the Valyrian steel blade shattered whites into pieces. Robb Stark stood beside him, breathing hard but smiling slightly. "You always arrive when things get impossible," Robb said. Jon gave a quick grin. "You should see the things I've fought beyond the wall." But their brief moment of relief ended quickly. The 4 remaining White Walkers were still approaching, slow, silent, watching both of them. Tormund spat into the snow. 4 of them, that's bad. Jon studied them carefully. "They're not attacking yet," he said. Robb noticed it too. The walkers had stopped moving again. Instead, they were observing the battlefield like commanders studying a map. Then, one of them stepped forward. This one looked different, taller. Its armor was darker and more complex than the others. Even the other walkers seemed to give it space. Tormund's face suddenly turned pale. "Oh no." Jon looked at him. "What is it?" Tormund spoke in a low voice. "That one, I've seen it before." Robb frowned. "Where?" "Hardhome." The name sent a chill through everyone nearby. Hardhome was where thousands of people had died when the White Walkers attacked the Wildlings. Jon's grip on Longclaw tightened. "So it's their leader here," Jon said. The tall walker slowly raised its hand. Immediately the Whites stopped attacking again. Hundreds of glowing blue eyes turned toward Robb and Jon. The battlefield fell quiet once more. Snowflakes began drifting slowly from the sky. The tall White Walker spoke. Not in normal language. It was a strange, icy sound like cracking frozen lakes. But somehow, Robb understood the meaning. "You are the blood of the first men." Jon heard it too. His eyes whitened slightly. "You can understand it?" Robb asked. Jon nodded slowly. "I think so." The walker pointed its icy spear toward them. "You carry the ancient blood, the blood that once ruled this land." Tormund looked confused. "What in the 7 hells is it saying?" Jon answered quietly. "It says, we carry the blood of the first men." Robb stared at the creature. "Why does that matter?" The walker stepped closer. Its glowing eyes studied both brothers carefully. "Long ago, the first men and the children of the forest broke the balance. The world of men spread too far." The icy voice echoed strangely in their minds. "You multiply, you conquer, you destroy." Jon's face hardened. "And you kill everyone." The walker ignored the comment. "But the blood of the first men is powerful, rare." It lifted its spear again. "You will not die like the others." Robb frowned. "What does that mean?" Jon understood first. "They don't want to kill us," he said quietly. Tormund blinked. "That's worse." Robb felt anger rising in his chest. "You think we'll join you?" The walker's glowing eyes narrowed slightly. "Not willingly." That was enough. Jon lifted Longclaw. Robb raised his sword. Both brothers stepped forward together. "Then come take us," Robb said coldly. The walker lowered its spear. The attack began instantly. 2 White Walkers rushed toward Jon. 2 others attacked Robb. Their movements were unbelievably fast. Jon clashed with the first walker, Longclaw striking against the icy blade with a loud crack. Robb fought the second one at the same time, sparks flying from their weapons. Around them the battlefield exploded into chaos again. Wildlings and northern soldiers fought the Whites while the giants smashed through the undead army. Tormund led a group of fighters to protect Jon and Robb from the swarming dead. Jon dodged a deadly strike and slashed at the walker's chest. The Valyrian blade cut deep. The creature shattered into ice. One down, but Robb was now fighting 2 at once. Their speed was overwhelming. One icy blade cut across his shoulder armor, nearly throwing him off balance. Jon saw it. "Orob!" He rushed toward his brother, but the tall walker leader suddenly stepped into Jon's path. Their swords collided with a loud explosion of frost. The leader was far stronger than the others. Jon felt the force shake his arms. Across the battlefield, the storm grew stronger. Snow began falling harder, and both Stark brothers realized something terrifying. The White Walkers were not just trying to win the battle anymore, they were trying to capture them, alive. And if the Starks fell tonight, the entire North would fall with them. The war for the living had reached its most dangerous moment. Snow now fell heavily across the battlefield, covering the ground in white and red. Fire from the torches fought against the growing cold, but the storm brought by the White Walkers kept getting stronger. In the middle of the chaos stood two brothers, Robb Stark and Jon Snow, fighting for the survival of everyone around them. Jon struggled as the tall White Walker leader pushed him backward. Every strike of its icy sword was powerful enough to shake Jon's arms. Claw clashed against the frozen blade again with a loud crack. Jon slid back in the snow, barely keeping his balance. "This one's stronger," Jon shouted. The creature said nothing. Its glowing blue eyes stayed fixed on Jon as it attacked again with frightening speed. Meanwhile, Robb was fighting two White Walkers at once. Their movements were smooth and deadly. One slashed toward Robb's chest while the other attacked from behind. Robb spun quickly, his Valyrian steel sword blocking one strike before cutting into the other walker's arm. Ice cracked. The walker shrieked in a strange, frozen voice, but it did not shatter. Robb realized the cut had not been deep enough. Behind him, Grey Wind leapt forward again, attacking one of the walkers and forcing it back. The direwolf snarled and circled the creature, buying Robb a few seconds. Across the battlefield, the fighting between the living and the dead had become brutal. Giants smashed through groups of whites. Night's Watch brothers used dragonglass to destroy the undead. Wildlings threw flaming oil across the ground to burn the bodies. But the dead kept rising. From the tower wall, Catelyn Stark watched with fear and determination. She turned to Roose Bolton, who was still guarded by northern soldiers. "You will help us," she said firmly. Bolton gave a small, calm smile. "My lady, I am your prisoner. And if the White Walkers win," Catelyn replied coldly, "you'll be a corpse like the rest of us." Bolton considered that quietly. Then he looked out at the battlefield. Jon and Robb were now fighting back to back as three White Walkers surrounded them. Bolton slowly spoke. "Release me." Greater number turned toward him angrily. "Why in the seven hells would we do that?" Bolton's pale eyes stayed on the battlefield. "Because I have soldiers out there who will follow me." Catelyn hesitated. It was dangerous, but she could see the truth in front of her. If they didn't stop the White Walkers now, none of their wars would matter. "Untie him," she ordered. Greatjon stared at her. "My lady, do it. Do it." Greatjon stared at her. "My lady, do it." Reluctantly, the ropes were cut. Roose Bolton stepped forward and walked to the edge of the tower wall. Then he grabbed a horn from one of the guards. The deep sound of the horn echoed across the battlefield. Bolton's soldiers who were still alive turned toward the tower. Roose spoke loudly. "Men of House Bolton," his voice carried through the cold air, "you can die here as traitors, or fight beside the North and live as warriors." For a moment, the Bolton soldiers hesitated. Then slowly, they turned their weapons toward the Whites. Even traitors understood survival. On the battlefield, the fight reached its peak. Jon was still locked in combat with the tall Walker leader. The creature moved with terrifying skill, but Jon had something it did not expect: determination. Jon suddenly stepped inside the Walker's attack and drove Longclaw upward with all his strength. The Valyrian steel sword pierced straight through the Walker's chest. For a second, everything froze. Then the creature exploded into a storm of ice shards. At the same time, Robb finally found his opening. Grey Wind knocked one Walker off balance. Robb swung his sword with full force. Crack! The second Walker shattered. Only one remained. The last White Walker looked around at the battlefield. Its army of whites was collapsing as the living burned and destroyed the bodies. Jon and Robb both stepped toward it, two Valyrian steel swords ready. The Walker understood. For the first time, fear appeared in its glowing eyes. It raised its weapon for one final attack. But the brothers struck at the same moment. Two blades of ancient steel cut through the creature. The final Walker exploded into frozen fragments. All across the battlefield, the remaining whites collapsed instantly. Silence slowly returned. The storm began to fade. The war between the living and the dead was over. Soldiers stood breathing heavily, surrounded by broken ice and burned corpses. Jon leaned on his sword, exhausted. Robb looked across the battlefield at the survivors. Wildlings, Northerners, Night's Watch, even Bolton soldiers, all alive because they had fought together. Roose Bolton slowly approached them. For once, the quiet lord looked thoughtful. "It seems," he said calmly, "that tonight we all survived." Robb stared at him for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly. "The real war for the North begins tomorrow." Bolton gave a thin smile. "I expected nothing less, Your Grace." The night had ended, but the Game of Thrones was far from over. And now the North knew something terrifying. The White Walkers were real, and one day they would return again.